Foundation of Stitching Racial Violence and Advocacy. I'm going to say that one more time. This is the Foundation of Stitching Racial Violence and Advocacy. The Stitch Their Name Memorial Project is one that consists of a group of cross stitchers and quilters across the country and beyond. The goal of this project is to honor the legacy of Black individuals of whom have died due to racism and or hate type of violence. Many hearts and hands have worked on these particular quilts, over 100 people. Today, the Margaret Walker Center begins our first project in honor of the Stitch Their Name project. In this particular program, we have three quilters as well as the founder who's going to talk about the Stitch Their Name project. Again, I would just like to say the Margaret Walker Center is an archive and museum dedicated to the preservation, interpretation, and dissemination of African American history and culture. As far as the three people who we are interviewing today, I would like to first start with Holly. Holly Johannes is a high school math teacher in Eugene, Oregon. She started and coordinated the Stitch Their Name Memorial Project in July of 2020 to honor the legacy of Black individuals from whom racism and bigotry have led to their death. She also designed, assembled, and quilted one of the two quilts, as well as stitched several of their portraits. So if you want to say hi, Holly, that is totally fine.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Caesar. Thanks for having me, and thanks to the Margaret Walker Center for hosting us and for displaying the quilts.
The next person we have on this wonderful panel is Maddie Winters. She is a social worker specializing in mental health and substance use in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She is one of the many fiber artists who participated in this project. Maddie was compelled to join others in honoring and bringing future awareness and further awareness to those who lost their lives due to racism and hate. Hey, Maddie, you want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, thanks so much for including us all in this discussion. And just, this whole experience has been great with, being a part of this project, and we're really honored to all be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And last but not least, we have Miss Tiffany Burns, who is from Alabama. After years of working in hospitality industry, which included the restaurant, her mother bought and ran for 12 years. She was diagnosed with Asperger's and subsequently changed careers entirely and began working for Heifer International as a livestock volunteer. This career move changed the trajectory of Tiffany's life, which led her to living in England. Upon returning to America for a brief stint, she completed her AA in agriculture and in 2018 returned to England and obtained her BSc in zoology. She is currently working for the University of Cambridge and is in a master's degree program in agriculture, rural development in Norfolk, England. Growing up in the South, Tiffany saw prejudice, racism, and xenophobia carried out in everyday life. Having a mother who was a quiet revolutionary instilled a resilience and a determination to participate as an ally to fight for justice. Cross stitching was a way to calm some of the effects of Asperger's as a child. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So we have here the wonderful panel for the Stitch Their Name project. And the first question I'm going to ask Holly. Can you tell us what is the Stitch Their Name project?
Yeah, like you mentioned in our intro, the Stitch Their Name Memorial Project is a collective art piece. Specifically, it's two quilts that is intention is to honor the Black individuals in the U.S. whose lives have been taken by police or others due to racial hate and bigotry. The art piece, the two quilts, contains 116 cross-stitched portraits of those Black individuals. whose lives have been taken. And those portraits were made by 75 volunteers across the country and beyond, outside of the country as well. We also have a website where we've written biographies of the folks that we've honored in the portraits.
Thank you so much, Holly. I would also like to just encourage people to use the comment sections if you all have questions for our guests. We'll definitely be looking at those. Tiffany, would you like to just talk a little bit just about your experience in being in the Stitch Their Name project?
Sure. I had gotten into stitching when I was younger, but then sort of restarted the habit or the hobby, excuse me, when I was in my 20s. And it had just sort of been a sort of frivolous thing. Like I tended to stitch kind of like chickens and cows and things like that. And then once I sort of got on Instagram and started following different people and realizing there was actually a voice behind it, that's when I found Holly. And I started following her and just really liked what she did and really liked her portraits. And so when she asked for volunteers, I immediately jumped at the opportunity. I had no idea what it was actually going to entail, but because she actually assigned people to us to stitch, she kind of asked like kind of what our background was, where we were from, what our experiences were, that kind of thing, and then sort of tailored who she gave us to stitch according to that. And then I started doing some research, and I that's kind of how I found y'all. Was I was trying to get a hold of Phillip's sister because I wanted to kind of get permission, and actually being able to integrate the two things together. So the thing that I liked to do as a hobby, and then also actually being able to use it for an actual purpose, to actually tell people stories, to actually put a face to something maybe somebody had maybe heard about a little bit, was really, really important. It was really a unique opportunity also to kind of be part of a community, knowing we were all working towards the same goal.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I truly appreciate it. And because you already mentioned it, can you just talk a little bit? You said Phillip's sister. Can you just tell the audience who Phillip is and why you contacted the sister?
So Phillip Lafayette Gibbs was one of the young men who was killed in the Jackson State massacre, along with oh my God, his name just totally left my head. James Earl Green. That's what it is. I knew I'd get it. Both of those young men were innocently killed by police officers in a shooting that happened in 1970 on the Jackson State campus. And personally, because I am white, I wanted to get permission from the families to make sure that it was okay that I actually stitched their family, because I didn't want to appropriate anything. I wanted to make sure they felt comfortable. And I also wanted to get their stories from them. I wanted to hear firsthand any information that they felt comfortable with me sharing, any information they weren't comfortable with me sharing. And so I wanted to get a hold of Dale, which is actually how I met Dr. Luckett. Was I contacted him because I knew he had some contact with her. And then I also was able to talk to James's sister, which I let her know about tonight, actually. But both men, I say men, James was only 17, and Phillip was in his early 20s and was a father, but was not very old at all. And both men were shot. One was just walking through campus, cutting home after work. He wasn't even involved in the protests that were happening. So when you say he was an innocent bystander, he had the only reason, excuse me, he was going through campus was to get home faster. And I think the thing for me was really realizing how none of the men that were involved, none of the police officers, none of the state troopers, none of the National Guard, nobody was held accountable. Nothing happened. And I think that conversation really needs to continue to happen as to why. And having the opportunity to kind of talk to the families and find out what their perspective is, where they are all these years later, and how it still affects them. It's still part of everyday life for them. And I wanted to find a way to put that into the project. I didn't want it to just be a portrait. I wanted it to have something really special and really personal to the families.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I truly appreciate just your thoughtfulness as far as your participation in the project. Maddie, can you also answer the same question as far as like how was your experience working with this project, this national project?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something where we haven't met each other in any other sort of realm besides through social media, as far as the participants, and just really amazing to see how this project transformed. When Holly first posted about it, it seemed like something great to be a part of, but really like watching the posts and more people finishing their projects. There was so much learning involved in this whole process. I stitched two people. I stitched Emmett Till and Nina Pop, who passed away last year. And what was really interesting is specifically for Nina, I could not find much information about her. So we're reading these stories, we're trying to research more about what was going on with these folks, and there's just not a lot of information. For Nina specifically, for Emmett, there was much more. And in Emmett's situation, I knew the story, but I didn't know the specifics. And I think it really speaks to what our schools are teaching, what's prioritized in the media, and really just thinking about, having this discussion with you guys and the process of being a part of this project. I just kept thinking about the white woman who was recently went missing and was murdered, and how you couldn't get on social media and not hear that story. It was national news, the FBI's involvement, all of that. And here we have these people of color that are missing and murdered every day. And we're not hearing these stories. You might, in our communities, we may see Facebook posts and shares from friends and family. We're not seeing FBI involvement. We're not seeing national news. And this white woman that went missing, we're hearing about her whole life. And here, for Nina, all I could find, was that she was bright and happy. That's how people described her, and that she worked in fast food. She was a daughter, a sister, and that's the extent of her story that I was able to find. And it just really speaks to, I think, what society is valuing. And I think it translates, into what people are thinking about in day-to-day life and all of that. And it really, it's really sad. I think a lot of people have the mindset of, if it's not impacting me, then it's not happening, or it doesn't matter. And being a part of this project really brought full circle that these are stories that need to be shared and people need to know. And we got to reach a different demographic of fiber artists and people, that follow us on social media and things that maybe wouldn't have heard the extent of these stories.
Thank you so much, Maddie. I truly appreciate it. And just to just add to that ideal of the media playing a role in whose story gets to be told and how it gets to be told, and how you all are getting a chance to participate in retelling a historic truth, right, through the quilts. So thank you, Maddie, so much for your response. Holly, I would like to ask you a question, and Tiffany and Maddie, I also would like for you all to think about it as well. Why is art significant in activism, particularly police brutality and quilts as a form of advocacy?
I think that, we've been talking, a couple people have mentioned the media. I think that there's there's a purpose for like the sharing of hashtags or print media. But I think what those pieces are missing that art brings to the table is that it's more humanizing. It evokes more emotions. I think with this particular project, we're really putting a face to those names that, we may or may not have heard about in the media. And sometimes even when we do have a face to a name, it's only like the video footage of that person's last moments of their life, So, so I think it's significant because it's humanizing. I also think that like with these quilts in particular, I think there's a power in each of the individual cross stitches that were made, but there's something more impactful even about them all being together. There's 116 portraits. That's only a fraction of the Black lives that have been impacted by white supremacy in this country. And it's still those 116 together is an overwhelming number when they're all seen collectively. Also, just I think there's a piece. I think that there's significance in being a viewer of art, but also as a contributor of art, especially with the cross stitch. Cross stitch is a very time-consuming process. And I don't know if the other stitchers felt this too, but I mean, I spent literal hours with each of the portraits that I made, and that making of that art really connected me to that person. I meditated over them. I prayed over them. I felt a lot of connection to them with that time that I spent with their likeness.
Thank you so much, Holly. Can you just talk a little bit more about like what is a cross stitch for some of our viewers who may not totally understand that terminology?
Oh yeah, sure. So a cross stitch is we use embroidery thread. We call it embroidery floss. And a lot of times we use a special fabric that's kind of in a grid pattern, and we're making a portrait that that makes literal cross stitches in different colors, sort of a pixelated image. Excuse me, a pixelated picture of each of these folks. So some people did full body portraits, some people did just face or face and bust, but they're little pixelated images of each of the people made from thread.
We have a comment from Gloria McRae, who is the family member of James Earl Green. They wanted to thank Tiffany Burns for your participation and just all that you have done for her brother, Phillip Gibbs. So I just wanted to make sure I give you that comment, Tiffany. They're very appreciative. Yeah.
And she's James's sister.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. So Tiffany and Maddie, I would like to ask you all the same question as far as how is art and activism? How did you all feel about that while you all were stitching? How did you all merge those two? And what's your background in the significance of making sure art and activism are working together?
Yeah, so I really just started cross-stitching 2 years ago, and it's interesting looking just at the history of fiber art in general. And, we see that this was like women's work back in the day of doing your needlework and making quilts, but you also see that fiber art has always been a way for people to share their opinions or political beliefs or things that they feel like others aren't listening to. So, you see things like, what was it? It was, I think, like Wombs on Washington, where people are sharing, they crocheted a bunch of wombs and are trying to say something. And just this medium lends itself to so many different types of creativity while also being able to send a really strong message. And for me in this process, you're thinking about this person and what they've been through, and also how many people you can reach through this, and people maybe that wouldn't otherwise be having these conversations. And You know, I know for me, I've had a lot of conversations with people that I share different beliefs about. And you get to a certain point where, you know, people aren't going to change their opinions. And you kind of hit this spot where there's no conversation, it seems like, to be had. And this gives a different voice of having that conversation and still bringing awareness. And, you know, just by being able to utilize social media in the creative process, reach a whole different group, besides just your immediate supports and people around you. So, you know, as Holly was saying, it's like these take hours, and you're sitting there, and you know, I did the research on Emmett prior to stitching, and we're sitting there thinking about it. And just, you know, Tiffany, when you were talking about accountability, the same thing happened in this situation where this 14-year-old boy is murdered, and the two people who murdered him go to trial, and they're tried by an all-white jury. They're not held accountable. 10 years later, they admit to murdering this boy who's 14. And it, you know, just the process of spending hours stitching this, and this woman who had accused him of flirting with her, essentially, then later also admits to lying about that. And just thinking about the family, the people impacted, this little boy that had so much life left ahead of him, that was all taken away because this woman was racist. And it's just, you know, I think for me, I'm thinking about the people I'm around and family and people who don't understand, and you know, and I there's still so much left for me to learn, but also just these conversations that people don't have ears to always hear. And it's like there's still so much racism going on. And through the process of researching Emmett, like just in March of 2019, one of his memorials was vandalized and shot up, and people were taking pictures with weapons, essentially bragging about defacing this memorial. This was, what, 3 years ago? And just how prevalent racism still is in our society, that just the people who feel like it's not impacting them aren't talking about. So I think just for me, that whole process of just thinking about this child and you know, his family and everything was just really powerful to be a part of.
You're on mute there, Dr. Caesar.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, did you want to add to that, a discussion on art and activism?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier. Actually sat down and took some notes because I wanted to make sure I kind of knew what I wanted to say, because I can ramble honestly about this for about an hour on my own, and I don't want to do that. So the thoughts that I kind of deconstructed everything down to was, when you look at police brutality, when you look at, I mean, I'm from Alabama, you know, it's everyday life there is you see something, whether it's a Confederate flag on someone's truck or in their yard or on their tattoo, or, you know, whether it's something they're saying in Walmart or what, you know, it's such an everyday thing that we don't think of activism as being an everyday thing. We think of marching. We think of holding signs. We think of those really big movements of people that are loud and there's chanting and there's music. We don't think of the small everyday things that we need to do to actually enact change. And I think for me, to create is to resist. And I think that creativity, and I think in a way, the way kind of how for me quilting and cross stitching is, because it's gentler, if that makes sense. You're using softer fabrics, you're using thread, you're spending your time putting it into this piece. And when you look at police brutality, when you look at racists shooting people and doing modern day lynchings and those kinds of things, their whole focus is destruction. Their whole focus is this hard, angry, violent death, really. And we are the antithesis of that. We are a group of people who come together, who use our gentleness and our time and our creativity to combat that and say, we're going to create rather than destroy. And I think art also, when you look at history, when you look at where quilting came from and its connection to slavery and its connection to colonization and, you know, the Europeans taking over the world and all of that kind of thing. When you look at people who are using quilting to remind people where it came from, and they're using it as a way to continue the memory of that. When you look at, like Maddie was saying about, you know, it was women's work, that kind of thing. And, you know, we're seeing more men get involved in cross stitch and kind of break those gender barriers a little bit. We're seeing more men get involved in quilting, which is breaking those gender barriers. And I think all of those things, I think art, I think creating, I think stitching, I think quilting, I think all of those really beautiful things has a very strong, very rooted in history way of bringing awareness and again, deconstructing the violence and deconstructing the anger and the white supremacy and the privilege and all of that. And I think one of the other really cool things, I thought about this today, was, like Maddie said, and Holly said, we haven't met each other personally. We kind of know each other through social media and stuff. We were able to give a voice, and we were able to tell people stories, and we were able to give a face to things, and we were in the background. It wasn't about us. It wasn't about really where we came from. It wasn't about this person. It was literally about the person who was on the quilt. I didn't know what Holly looked like until last week. No idea. Had absolutely no idea. Same with Maddie. So our stories, we were not in the forefront. It was the people who have had their lives shortened for no other reason other than their race. And I think art and I think creativity does that.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I really enjoyed your answer, and I wrote, to create is to resist. I just love that statement. It's so beautiful and profound. So thank you. Holly, I would like to ask you about the demographics of the stitchers. Now, we only have a few, but you all had a lot of stitchers working on these two quilts. So can you tell us a little bit more about their background?
Yeah, so as it was mentioned, we don't know each other in real life. I've only met one other stitcher in real life that participated in that project, and that's because he's my husband. So beyond that, I haven't met anyone. And so with that being said, I do know some of the demographics of the folks, but I just want to say this wasn't something that I officially surveyed, and so I'm trying not to make any assumptions. I'm just sharing what I know that people have publicly shared. So we had volunteers from several different racial backgrounds. We had stitchers that were Black, white, Latinx, Asian. We had a large range of age and age groups. So we had a contributor that was a teenager, and then also folks, in their retirement age. We had stitchers from 30 different states across the country, as well as from the UK and from Canada and from Isle of Man, which I hope I don't sound too ignorant by saying I had not heard of Isle of Man before this.
Nobody
stitcher.
has.
So, okay. And so that was wonderful. And then as far as like quilting goes, I made one of the quilts, but I also want to give a huge public shout out to Sam Page, who I've also never met in person. They live in Virginia, and they made the other quilt. So we had a large range of folks.
Thank you so much, Holly. Another question I have for you is, do you have any plans of meeting everyone or doing some type of like huge Zoom conference call where everybody can meet, or have you all did something like that?
We haven't we haven't done anything. And like, it seems so obvious now that you said it. My response was going to be like, no, because we've been doing this in the midst of COVID, and I've just used COVID as an excuse. Like, we can't get together, but I don't see why we couldn't have a Zoom get together. No plans of as of right now, but that's a good idea.
Thank you so much. So my next question is, and I guess, and you all have already kind of answered the question, and it might be a little bit um, repetitive, but I guess I'm looking at more of the ideal of working in a community versus your individual activism per se. As we know, racial injustice continues. You all have all mentioned different cases in which there was overt racial injustice. Why is it important that people participate in activities like these to combat it? Maddie, can you start with that question?
Yeah. I think kind of what I've touched on before, just that we have to be creative in our activism, because just having conversations with people isn't always well received. But also, I think that as white people, it's on us to initiate those conversations. I think that we have a responsibility to call out ignorance. And, while we're talking about all these periods of time where people weren't held accountable for these tragedies of ending people's lives, of murdering them, but also the racism that we're seeing day to day, that we have a responsibility to call those things out that we're seeing. But as far as just, the creativity piece, I think that there's something to be said for, having to think outside the box. I think that a lot of times we don't think that that's a necessary part of what we need to be doing day to day, as we get caught up in our lives and caught up in, going to work and coming home and that sort of thing. But there's, all of these cases are just showing how much is happening outside of our communities as well. And, that we have a responsibility to keep telling these stories, and keep, when we're seeing these, people being shared on Facebook that are missing, or we're seeing the news and hearing of these stories, that we're emphasizing people of color too. It's just, you're always hearing about these white women that go missing, and there's so much more going on. So I think, thinking forward, that we just have to keep finding creative ways to have these conversations and bringing information to the forefront that media is not going to do, and necessarily the people around us aren't going to be having.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. Paula or Tiffany, did you all any one of you all want to add to the significance of having a group effort towards conquering racial injustice through stitching?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, if that's okay. I think one of the things that I found through the process was, when you have a collective group, people feel a little bit safer to ask questions that maybe they otherwise wouldn't. I think it also gives an opportunity for people who don't know how to get involved to get involved. If they don't know how, if they don't have marches near them, or if they don't have any clue where to start, but they have a craft that they do, and they have a way that they create, and then they see something and go, oh, I can do that. I can stitch a portrait. Oh, and I can do it however I want. I can do a full body, or I could just do the face, or I can do this, or I can get creative with it. I think it opens a lot of doors for people who don't know how to start the conversations, because if they are working on something and they're at a family gathering, or they're at home and their kid says, why are you stitching that? It opens the conversation. And I think that's really important, is to start, like Maddie said, is to start the conversation, and we have to be the ones to do it. And I think when you work collectively, it opens a lot of doors for people.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate the response. Another question I want to ask is that I think everyone kind of mentioned COVID-19, the pandemic, because we're still in the pandemic, right? So I would like to know if you all can tell me your experience of working on this particular project during the pandemic. Were there other things you found that this cross stitching may have helped you with or made you think about while we were going through a pandemic? Holly, can you start with that one?
Yeah, I think that I think a piece of this project that I appreciate is, and I guess it's amplified by the fact that, we started it during, maybe some of the more severe lockdowns and some of the more intense periods of isolation, is that there was still a connection to community, even though we were separate and we hadn't met. We're still collectively working on a project and had those connections with each other through social media. I think it helped reduce some of the isolation for sure.
Thank you so much, Holly. Tiffany, did you want to add to that about your
Yeah,
experience?
because I spent the entire pandemic in England, our lockdown was very different from the States. And we were not allowed out of the house. I have a dog, which you probably saw walking past, sorry. I have a dog, and so I was actually allowed out more than most people because I was allowed to walk her. But we weren't allowed to be near each other. All the restaurants were shut, all the pubs were shut. Masks were mandatory everywhere, no matter what, that kind of thing. So having something to do, honestly, having something to create rather than just sitting and watching TV or just sitting in the house and watching Netflix all day. There was a purpose. There was time spent researching. There was time spent contacting people. I ended up going to Scotland for a little bit during the lockdown and staying at a friend's house and worked on the cross stitches while I was in Scotland. Was incredibly isolated and in a pandemic. And so this actually gave me an opportunity to have something to focus on and design and plan and work on, which I was honestly, Holly, thank you. It was not only was it a privilege, but it was also a little bit of my sanity.
Thank you so much. Maddie, how about you?
I think just a lot of what both Holly and Tiff just shared, but also for me, I spent so much time watching the news during, all of 2020 really, and all of the protesting and, George Floyd's death and everything just really brought this project, I think, like forefront for me of just feeling really helpless in the context of what was going on. My husband is in the National Guard too, and he had gotten called to help with the protesting, and he is a Black man, so he was in the National Guard and in a really odd position then of being this Black man while there's these protests going on for Black Lives Matter. And just, again, I just felt this overwhelming helplessness all the time. And being able to be a part of this, you're seeing the hashtag that Holly created, you're seeing all these stories, and as people are finishing each project, really bringing that sense of community and kind of like Tiff, you just said, like bringing purpose to something, and feeling, like there's not a ton we can do as individuals, but really feeling that group effort of just, putting that angst and helplessness into something where we're learning stories, we're sharing them with people, we're creating art that can be handed down. When I think about cross stitch, like I have cross stitches that my great grandma, who I never met, has created, and to think that this, project, these quilts are something that could far outlive any of us is just really powerful. And the quilts are great, but then also going and reading the stories that go along with them is equally as powerful, I think. And like I had shared it, with Emmett Till, it's like I knew vaguely his story, but really being able to dig into that, and as people were posting, reading all of these stories, and in a sense feeling like you're getting to know these people, was really powerful.
Thank you so much. And I just want to, share. I am so inspired by you all, and I definitely want to learn how to cross stitch or quilts. Sew in general. I also had the opportunity to be creative during the pandemic, and I created a series called Black Meditations with Dr. Caesar, in which I interviewed different people who were doing different type of social activism within their community. And so just to say, I understand how it feels to be able to create community in the midst of isolation, and how it's very nurturing to the soul. I know that you all kind of mentioned it, the Margaret Walker Center and sending the quilts, and Dr. Luckett, our director. I just want to know if someone could just specifically say why the Margaret Walker Center was identified as a good place for the quilts. And Tiffany or Holly, one of you all can answer it. That's fine.
Oh yeah. Either way, I have a neighbor that's weed whacking right now, so I apologize.
Okay.
Of course, perfect timing. So as Tiff had mentioned earlier, we tried to reach out to the families as best that we could of the folks that we were honoring. We made attempts to reach everybody, because like Tiff said, like, these aren't our stories, and I think, in some instances, in these families are thrust into the limelight, not because of their choosing, and not because of a happy incident, right? And I feel like some of their fame feels like the wrong word, but for lack of a better word, some of their fame is it's not wanted, and it's out of their control. And so we really wanted to give folks a chance to share their stories and share their perspectives, and also opt out if they didn't want their loved one to be included in this project too, and we'd respect that. So Tiff had reached out, or was trying to reach out to the family members of the folks that she had stitched, and got a hold of Dr. Luckett, sort of as a middle way to reach out to them. And Dr. Luckett and staff at the Margaret Walker Center were excited about the project, and so we kept that in the back of our mind, and were lucky enough when the quilts were finished to reconnect with you all, and make that happen, get that connection at the center. And we're so grateful, so humbled, and really appreciate that you all are willing to display them and share them with your Jackson State community.
Thank you so much, Holly. We do have them up right now at the Margaret Walker Center. Can you just talk a little bit about the QR code, and what happens when people use the QR code with the quilts?
Yeah, so the QR code will take you to our website, stitchtheirnamesmemorialproject.com, and we have photos of the quilts there, but we also have the biographies of each of the people that we stitched into the quilts. And I'd really encourage people to check out those biographies. We tried as best we could to not only share the stories about the deaths, of the moment of these folks' deaths, but also and it was, Maddie mentioned that it was hard in some instances, but we really tried to find information and share information about these folks' lives, right? Like George Floyd is not simply the person that was murdered by Derek Chauvin. He was a father, a brother, a partner, a friend, a valuable member of his community, and that goes for all of the folks that we honored in these portraits. I think it's one thing to know, like, something that sticks out in my mind is it's one thing to know that Jordan Davis was a 17-year-old that was murdered by someone who didn't like hearing his rap music at a gas station, but there's something even more like heart-wrenching to know that Jordan Davis liked to sleep with two pillows and would bring extras to his sleepovers at his friend's house, and I just I really hope that people can read those biographies and see themselves and see their loved ones in these stories.
Thank you so much, Holly. I just wanted to read some of the wonderful comments that we have from our audience members. Um, the Margaret Walker Center states, it's been wonderful to see how the lives of Phillip, Lafayette Gibbs, and James Earl Green have been commemorated in these quilts. We also have art is more humanizing. It's also an important form of activism. So people are really loving the quotes out there. Um, in addition, we have a comment from Nick Payne. An inspirational project giving voice to lives taken in egregious circumstances. All involved should be proud of what you have done to remember these lives and shine light on this important topic. So I just wanted to make sure. Oh, and we have Nick Powell who says the arts can heal and bring joy. It's also an act of resistance. And Miss Pam Burns states, our art gallery has a fiber arts quilt exhibit every December. If you tour with these, we will be honored to exhibit them. So we have other places who are requesting to see these wonderful quilts. So I want to know what's next. What is next for Stitch Their Name project? Maddie, do you know what's next?
So really Holly has headed that up. She had shared that I think it's headed to New Jersey next, but I think she should tell you more about that process.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So we're really trying to, I mean, we would love to see these quilts do a tour around the country and be in every state in whether it be in an art gallery or a cultural center or at an anti-racist event or in a school. So yes, the quilts next are going to New Jersey for a couple months, and then they are going to go to Iowa. And so they are booked out on display until April of 2022, but we are always on the lookout for other venues to show it, and hopefully that have connection, either to our cross stitchers, our contributors, or to the loved ones or the community of the folks that we're honoring in the quilt. So
thank you so much.
Oh, go ahead.
We have a comment who someone who is Nikki Powell. They asked where in North Jersey. I'm in New York, and I would love to see it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. They're going to be at the Noyes Art Garage, which is in Atlantic City. And if you go to our website, stitchtheirnamesmemorialproject.com, there is a tab that it'll show the pictures of the quilts and also a map of where they've been and where they're going.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Holly. Maddie, how are you feeling now that this project, the stitching part is done? Are you working on any other activities right now fusing art and activism?
I can't say that I am right now. I've continued to cross stitch and really just do more stuff for friends and family right now, just with the holidays coming up and that sort of thing. But definitely something that I am open to and would like to continue to be a part of.
Okay, awesome. How about you, Tiffany? Are you doing some cross stitching right now, or are you doing some other type of art?
I'm doing a little bit of cross stitch right now because I'm working on my master's. I've very limited time. I have 3 essays due on Monday, so that sort of cross stitch kind of takes a back seat for the moment. But I have been, and part of it is because of this project and learning the stories and reading some of the bios that go with the images that Holly put up on her Instagram. Some of the stories I had actually not heard of because, as Maddie said, they don't make the news and you don't hear about them. And so I've actually shifted kind of my focus of my degree a little bit because of it. So my BSc is in zoology, and I've shifted I'm getting an MA instead of an MSc. So I'm working, it is in agricultural and rural development, but I'm focusing on gender and racial studies as part of that. So I'm looking at how race affects access to land, access to water. I'm looking at the gender inequality within the agricultural industry and that kind of thing. And so I'm not necessarily working on too many cross stitches right now because I'm studying so much, but it actually has influenced the direction of what degree I'm getting, so that hopefully when I'm done in a year, I can start to kind of blend the two, because that's what I would like to see happen, is kind of see the integration of artistic work and farming and women having more to say and more to do within that industry. So it all kind of meshes in a way, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. And I love to hear how that how this project has impacted you to include more in your own analysis. I would like to say, Nick Payne said it would be amazing to find a place to display these in the UK. So Holly, I'm wondering, do you have any international, are you all going any place outside of the United States with the quilts?
We would sure be willing to. I know we have Tiff there. So I think that would be wonderful if we can find a gallery or a cultural center or somewhere to display them internationally as well.
I'm going to totally interrupt you, Holly, because I'm excited about it. There is a museum in Cambridge, and they have smaller exhibits. It's near the Sedgwick, in the center of town. And they've actually had a tapestry and thread-based exhibit for the past year. And it was shut down a little bit for COVID, but they've opened it back up. And so I've got a couple of contacts at Cambridge that I've sort of like sent emails to and said, would y'all be interested in something and like kind of redoing another kind of tapestry based, because it's really interesting. Some of the stuff is from, like 900. But it kind of goes through like the evolution of how stitching has evolved. And I'm trying to get some contacts with that if you're interested. But I think it would be an amazing thing to have over here, and I'd be happy to facilitate that if possible.
Awesome, thank you. I love the connection, and to see these quilts global is definitely something that's going to happen. So this is awesome. So I have one more question. Again, if anybody else have any questions, please leave them in the chat. Thank you to everyone who has been participating in this wonderful dialogue, watching on YouTube and or Facebook. So my last question, we can start with Maddie. What did you take away? What was like your biggest takeaway from this experience? And why would you encourage others to view the quilts?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me was just the stories, and like Holly was saying, trying to not focus so much on just how these people died, but who they were, and as a social worker, I hear people's stories all the time, and then seeing, I specifically work with people who have mental illness and substance use difficulties, but how much racism and socioeconomic status and all these different things really play into where people have ended up, and kind of seeing, the stories of the people that we stitched and being able to get to know them. It felt like getting to know them almost by hearing their stories. And I think that's my biggest takeaway is, wanting to continue to learn the stories of who these people were, and bringing awareness in the ways that we can.
Thank you so much. Holly, how about you? What would you say your biggest takeaway was concerning this project and the impact of the quilts? And why would you encourage people to view them?
I think my biggest, if I had to pick a biggest takeaway, because I feel like this project has brought a lot to my life, is the experience talking with the loved ones of folks that we were honoring. It's really hard to put into words how that impacted me. The conversations were so powerful, and I can't imagine the loss and the grief that these folks have experienced, and I'm so grateful and humbled that they would share their stories with me. And I think about them every day, and I think about those conversations and these folks every day, and it reminds me, it's a good reminder that I need to be advancing anti-racist work in all the spheres of my life. This project in particular was, within my crafting community, but I need to be working on activism in my neighborhood, in my city, in my home, within my family. I work at a school, so in my workplace. So it's just been a very powerful reminder. And I hope that I would encourage others to view the quilts, like it's been said before, because it's humanizing. It's putting a face and a name and a personality to folks that either maybe you've never heard of, or maybe you've only seen their name in print in a hashtag. So.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, how about you? What would you say is your biggest takeaway, and why would you encourage people to view the quilts?
I think my biggest takeaway is probably the same as Maddie's and Holly's. It's the stories. It's the shock of how many people I had not heard of, and I had not heard their story. And then I encourage people to go also look at the Instagram, because their bios are in there as well. And just seeing story after story after story, and knowing this is 1%, if that. I mean, it's such a tiny little snippet of what's actually going on. And it spans so many years, all the way up to current stories. And every day those stories are added to. And I think for me, it was, like Maddie said, we get really busy in our everyday lives, and we get really focused on what's going on with us. And reading those stories made me go, I really need to pay attention. The Instagram, I just saw a comment. The Instagram is Fritz's Stitches. It's got all the information. It's got the website and stuff on there as well. But I think, it's made me more present. It's made me focus on, I need to pay attention to this every single day. I need to do something every day, whether it's, if you hear somebody say something in the grocery store, or having a conversation with family, or whatever. It's kind of woken me up a little bit as to what's going on around me that I don't know anything about. And I would encourage people to see the quilts, because not only are they beautiful, and not only do they tell people stories, but they also, not that they just kind of get your feet wet, but if people aren't aware, and it's, when you read the news again, you only hear about their deaths. I think it's a really, really good way to actually see who these people are, to see what it's about, and then hopefully it will push them to go further.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I appreciate that. I see in the comment section we have different ways of contacting Stitch Their Name Project. Holly, can you give us some more information on how people can reach out to connect with the Stitch Their Name community?
So we have a hashtag on Instagram and Facebook. So it's hashtag Stitch Their Names Memorial Project on both. And then if you wanted to contact us with any questions, or if you have any leads on a space that you'd like to see the quilts displayed in, you can go to our website, stitchtheirnamesmemorialproject.com, and there's a contact us button, which will send an email to us.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you so much, Holly, Maddie, and Tiffany, for Tiffany it's almost like 2 a.m. I'm sure where she is, and she is up with us in the United States doing this wonderful panel. So thank you all for taking the time to participate in our first program surrounding these wonderful quilts. I also would like to shout out Miss Lauren Shelby, who has put this wonderful program together. She is the education and marketing PR person at the Margaret Walker Center. And thank you, Dr. Luckett, for your encouragement as well as your support. And also thank you to all of the Margaret Walker Center's staff and supporters and friends who are watching this wonderful panel. I would like to end this by saying, come see the quilts. They are at the Margaret Walker Center. We are open Monday through Fridays from 8 to 5. They're available. They're in our main gallery, and they're up for you to see. In addition, I would like to let you all know we have one more program coming up on November 18th called Quilts, Art and Music, Engaging Arts and Activism at the Margaret Walker Center. That particular panel, we will have Jackson State University students, faculty, as well as staff talk about how they are involved in arts and activism. So thank you so much for participating in the foundation of stitching racial violence and advocacy. And we look forward to see you next time. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Dr. Caesar.